I don't know if she could get her Alice back.
We're living in a liminal space where both realities are true.
I think I will get you to resubscribe. Camera 2. Actually, camera 1. Camera 1. Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Mark and I are discussing the penultimate episode of Constellation, so spoilers are ahead. And if you're enjoying the content and don't want to miss a single video, just make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications. Also, if you're enjoying this video, feel free to give us a like. And with that, I thought we could start with the name of the episode, because it's called Through the Looking Glass, and I think there are a lot of parallels between this and the book that it's based off of. Starting off with mirrors, which I felt were pretty prominent in this episode and in some of the other ones.
Yeah, we see that Jo gets her Alice, brings her back. They are, experiencing each other as she goes to get more hot water through the mirrors. We also see that the Alices are able to see each other. Like, they are able to...
That was a big scene.
Yeah. They're able to almost cross this, divide of these two...
liminal space or whatever.
Yeah, the liminal space, and they're able to cross it through these mirrors.
Right. And it's interesting because, like, if you think about it as a theme, there, it represents, like, reversals and, like, dualities, and I think that's kind of a good theme for this, where it's like we have different but, like, opposite Alices, and there's, like, two of them. I do potentially think that we're down to, like, two worlds. I thought there were many more. I still don't understand a few, like, potential inconsistencies, but yeah, so I feel like it's a good kind of, like, metaphor for what's going on is mirrors. They had reflections for quite some time. Also, kind of like the book, like the mirror. So in the book, like, she enters the mirror in order to get into the other world, versus here it's like they're using the mirror or reflective surfaces to see the other world.
Yeah, to communicate with the other world.
Right.
We actually did get a clue to this, not besides Alice's name, which is a very clear reference to Alice in Wonderland, Alice going through the looking glass herself.
Right.
We did get a tease of this with the twins, where one of the twins told Alice that, just like the book, Through the Looking Glass, that Alice convinces herself of 6 impossible things a day. And, communicating with another world is a very impossible thing.
Very impossible thing. That's a good catch. I forgot. I do remember that reference now that you mentioned that. So they set that up well. And I also felt like the mirror scene was pretty impactful, and it also gave Jo another time to communicate with her, or at least see her daughter. She ended up having to, like, use her, the other Alice to, like, really communicate. But I felt like that was great setup for the payoff of when Jo finally has to make a choice.
Yes.
Like, maybe she could... I don't know if she could get her Alice back. I don't know. But it definitely would have been at the cost of this girl in front of her.
Right. I think Jo did make the right decision there, because, I don't think that Jo could physically make her body into that world. I don't think she could, theoretically keep that version of Alice in this world. And so, yeah, at that point she had to make the decision. And I think, she's like, this is an Alice that is mine, like, in a way she is mine, but I didn't give, birth to this Alice, but, like, she's still important, and it's important to save her.
I think potentially that there could have been a switch. I don't know if it's like the Jo's switching or the Alice is switching, that could have potentially happened at the cost of the Alice in front of her. I'll get into that idea a little bit later on. but that it was right to save the child in front of her. Like that would be a pretty cruel thing.
I was a little concerned because, you know, we did see that these Alices were able to communicate with each other. Like, they haven't gone to space,
Right.
so they don't have the psychosis. They were able to experience these two different states of reality and communicate with
Right.
each other. And so, if Joe was trying to prove her case that she's not the correct Joe, like, and not be viewed as a crazy person, like, Alice was her best chance. And also, if Alice dies there, then literally there is no. One, Joe would be liable probably for that because she was in her care. And
Yep.
two, you know, she can't. She would never be able to prove that she's from the wrong state of existence.
Yeah. Definitely. So my next kind of parallel to the book, a bunch of the book takes place as like this game of chess where Alice is designated a pawn, and I'm kind of curious whether or not that parallels what is going on. Like, do you think it's possible that the Valya is using her?
Well, I didn't think. You know, we know that she was talking to the non-Swedish Alice. She had been talking to her.
Right.
This has been a fear, and like she's been trying to get her to like play this game with her,
Yes.
and so I wouldn't have thought so at first, but then after seeing her sleeping, you know, like waking up in the hospital and saying like, "Do you want to see your mama? Like, just come with me." Like, I do think that there is more to the Valia's game of what she's doing, or maybe the Changerling, if you want to call her the
Right.
Changerling. But something is afoot, and she is trying to get Alice to play that game.
You know, when I said that, I forgot that there was something about a game, so I didn't even think about that. And I wonder if the game is already going, you know, and like the Valia is already moving pieces and using Alice as a lure or something along those lines. You know, like she's already set things in motion. But kind of continuing along with that and kind of continuing along with like how the book goes, Alice is really smart in the show. Like she's figured this stuff out before the adults have. So I think that she may actually be a key player in whatever kind of victory looks like in the end if we do have a happy or happy-ish ending. So I think she could be instrumental and not just, even though she is a pawn, that she's not just going to be used.
I do think she is instrumental now for sure because she is now conversed with the other Alice. So she has, you know, like I would even say Joe, who's been dealing with this uncertainty of being in the correct state or incorrect state. Like Alice has actually experienced this other state, and like Joe, you know, has to a little bit, but kind of Magnus listening to the recording, he has as well, but still Alice has probably the most information outside of like Henry and Bud.
Just wild. Like she's a kid.
And she
Um,
hasn't even been to space.
right, but I think it's that like liminal age thing
Hmm.
that maybe has something to do with it. But who knows? And I love the portrayal. I love the two actresses. It helps like have there be a split between these two Alices. So very much kind of enjoyed that.
I do love that, you know, I feel a lot of kid actors are terrible in roles like these because they like you can tell that they're acting, right? And you can
Hmm.
see and sometimes it like breaks the illusion of this being a kid in this fantastical world. And yet I feel that this actress, this young actress has done such a phenomenal job of playing, you know, both of them simultaneously because they are twins, have done
Yes.
such a phenomenal job of portraying this
Yeah.
unknowing, smart little girl.
Right. And while like this isn't a fault, I don't necessarily see huge depth in it. Like I don't think we've seen a wide range of acting skills, but the emotions that they have needed to get from her, of like uh you know confusion, and like especially when she's like looking at something and she's knowing it's wrong and trying to piece it together, you can kind of see that look. Like the looks that they have needed to get from these actresses have been absolutely nailed. And so I think like keeping it to a few things that they have been able to like really hit hard on, I think has been great. Absolutely love that. The next kind of parallel I would say is, and this is going to be a little bit of a mouthful, but like the fantastical and the logical. So the not technically through the looking glass, but Alice's adventure in Wonderland helped end didacticism and ushered an aim to delight and entertain in children's literature. And didacticism is like a philosophy of, I think, like teaching and informing in art in general, whether that's like literature or, works of art. And this book helped usher in kind of a new era. And I do feel like the show is kind of similar to that. Like there are things that are at first seem wildly fantastical that make no sense. But then also kind of like in both of the books, there's a heavy use of logic. And I feel like once we see things from a new light, the fantastical actually kind of makes heavy logical sense. If we think about like the fantastical, it's like the ship's undocking when there's supposed to be somebody on the other side. The toy rabbit that is dry after she sees it in a puddle and being stomped. The playing of the piano when like she doesn't know how to play the piano. And then like the other side of that is like when we've seen logical reasons for a number of these weird things, like seeing the other side of the rabbit scene. I loved when we saw Paul say, "You got to stop breathing," because when we first
Mm-hmm.
heard that recording, it was like, "Oh, is he giving some kind of secret message?" And then you find out the reality of it, and it's kind of interesting. Like this show feels like the fantastical and the logical.
Yeah, and I do think they really have done a good job of like, even though there are the fantastical things, like you said, the docking, the piano, it still feels grounded in a reality that feels real.
But it's interesting because like the some of the fantastical elements are real world fantastical elements. They're like real world conspiracies, whether or not these are real
Mm-hmm.
or not. Like, and conspiracies story, like we've got like the changerling, we've got like the did people actually go to the moon, you know was Paul McCartney replaced, like all of these kind of like stories, and like that kind of stuff. But then it also had like it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, and I have enjoyed seeing it kind of like come together of bringing like things some people may think is like the crazy parts of society with like the very, scientific parts.
Yeah, I totally agree on that.
All right, so I thought the expanding on the cabin in this episode, seeing it a number of times instead of just kind of shortly, there was a lot of really interesting stuff there. It was interesting seeing it in more depth.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, one thing that I've noticed about the cabin in general and why, like, maybe all of this is taking place so prominently at the cabin where, like, it didn't happen at, like, Joe's house.
Okay.
The twins talk about they have to go on the lake to hear these recordings, these ghost tapes, because of the liminal space. And to me, the cabin is in a liminal space. It is a place between places. It's a place that you go to, but then you leave. Like, it is this in itself liminal space. And that's why we're seeing that, like, the Alices are able to see each other. You know, we see the Bud and Henry switch. We see that they're, you know, the 4 different versions of this cabin that we can go to that's like broken down, not broken down. And I think that this really explains also the helicopter scene.
Okay.
So if you think about the helicopter scene when Joe and Alice both experience a moment of nothing is around them, very similar to these cabins that they've experienced, where the cabins are run down, they're there by themselves. And to me, when they were in those helicopters, that was another liminal space that they were at. They were in the middle of the desert, in this, you know, transient spot. And so, like, these liminal spaces are what causing these moments of touching the other state.
Yes. I like that with the desert, because I did kind of wonder about that. I like that. So I thought that, like, the cabin was a great illustration of some of the concepts. You know, instead of like having to see things over a number of different scenes to see the differences between like these different versions of characters and trying to intuitively understand things. I think that the cabin is like, it's a straight visual. Like, you can see that this painting is like this world, but so it's like the Wounded Angel painting is like the Wounded Angel world,
Right.
but it has the Changerling in it, you know? So it's like they've swapped places. And we see the Devil by the Pot painting. That's like the Devil by the Pot world, but we see the Wounded Angel in that paint. So it's like they've like 2 different worlds where the people have swapped places. So it's like a visually explaining what's going on. Like, we saw a visual explanation of Schrodinger's cat, where it's like sometimes the cat is dead, sometimes it's alive, sometimes it's both.
Alive and
because
dead.
because it's not observed, so we're in this liminal space, you know. I thought it was an interesting way to like try to visualize these complex ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I did think that was smart use. So getting a little bit of extra time in there was helpful. The cabin itself too, like so I kind of wonder, do you think that, so another another thing that was brought up at least briefly was like quantum entanglement. And quantum entanglement, one of the wild things about that is like it can happen over crazy distances, you know, like planetary and farther distances. And I kind of wonder whether or not there is like also a time aspect to the entanglement of things in this universe, because the cabin, the liminal cabin, seems partially burnt before the fire actually happens.
Yeah, I feel like, because that was my understanding of it as well, is that the reason why the cabin looks burnt is because it will be burnt. And like,
Right.
it's like almost like the cat thing, right? Like, the cat is both alive and dead. The cabin is both burnt and not burnt at the same time.
So that seems like it's, you know, these things that are connected, like it doesn't matter the distance between them. Like, we've seen that with Bud and Henry, who are like at this point at such different places in their life, but because they're living different lives, they're in very physical different places, you know? And yet it seems like they can connect with each other. You know, that Henry can write on a mirror and Bud can see that in a very different place.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of wonder whether or not there is some kind of like connection between not just like two things that are connected, entangled, if we'll see connections not just over distance but over space.
I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah.
It is going to be interesting because we only have one episode left. And I feel like there's so much that needs to be covered or touched on, and I don't know if they're doing a season 2, but I could see them doing a season 2. Like,
I'm very confused about that. So I keep reading in places limited series, right? But then I'm now seeing where people are being interviewed that are related to this, and they're asking questions about like season 2, and instead like the actor that played Paul, and instead of the actor that played Paul saying no, it's a limited series, he was like, I'm definitely down to do it, which might be a hashtag spoiler, but it also took the creator 7 years to make this, so I don't know how long it would take for a next one. So it's like, and then I saw something else where they were talking with like the creator of it, and it's like, I don't know. I'm very confused.
We're living in a liminal space where both realities are true. We can either have a limited series or a season 2, but we're in that liminal space. We don't know. Both states are true. Both. We can have both until one of them happens.
Yeah. I could see that. And I'm still hopeful that with like the limited series that maybe we get a satisfying ending and they can still find a way to continue it, rather than having a big cliffhanger ending.
Yeah.
I don't know. Reading limited series and then having a cliffhanger ending feels like that would be a bit of a like.
What was the point? Yeah, why was I watching this if I knew this was going to end and you're going to leave it open-ended?
Right. I'm okay with open ending. I do like ambiguous endings.
Not cliffhanger.
But not cliff. Exactly. Yes.
Like, what's going to happen in season 2, you'll never know. It's a limited series.
Like the Thing is a great ambiguous ending. It definitely doesn't give you an answer, but that's like part of the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Okay. You brought this one up much earlier. The idea of ghosts. And I think it was interesting because, like, once again, going back to like reading some of the interviews with some of these people, the idea of this started off as a ghost story. So the creator had an experience in a cabin, like a remote cabin, where they heard "mama" a few times and were never able to find the source of it.
Ooh, scary.
And it's kind of interesting hearing the genesis for like the nugget. Like, obviously it's fleshed out so much more than that. But it's interesting. I've enjoyed the portrayal of ghosts, like especially when Jo was in her office.
Yeah.
And like the crew was coming in, cleaning up the office from like the dead one, and they're in front of each other and there's a flash. Like, it's interesting seeing ghosts in this and portrayed, like, how could they happen,
Right. And we it's weird to like see the effects of these ghosts that like, like the ghost of one Jo is having an effect on the other Jo. Like, she has a constant headache that like,
right,
like in a way that's like the ghost of the other Jo that's like still affecting the live Jo.
Right. I think that's like that entanglement, where the one definitely affects the other. And I think that the show has kind of, for me, like the season has evolved in an interesting way, from like starting off this kind of like mystery thriller horror in the beginning to like very sci-fi with its like explanations and getting into like quantum mechanics to seeing that play through and having this kind of like Christopher Nolan-esque perspective shift to like the entrance of the Valya at the end of this, and like where is that going? Like, are we getting back to like ghosts and changerlings? And it's it's interesting that the story that it's telling and the different kind of parts. Like,
Well, and that felt like full horror. That with the
yes,
Valya, and it that was like a very like everything so far has in a way been able to kind of have an explanation, right? And this seems so this part seems so paranormal. It seems so
yeah,
like outside the realm of science that now that we have a dead person that's trying to convince a little girl of doing something, and
right,
it was kind of spooky.
yeah. It's almost like a work of classical music, like an overture. You know, like almost like an overture where there's like different movements to it. You know, like it feels to me, it feels a little bit less like a show with three acts. You know, I feel like that's like the typical way that you do drama is like have three acts, you know, and build up to a climax and then like come down from there. And this feels like there's a number of different movements that happen within it, you know, and that there's like all of these different sections that can be enjoyed in different ways. So I'm definitely enjoying the way that this story has been crafted. There have been a few points where it's like it's a little confusing, or like I don't know if they're trying to be too smart or what. So it hasn't always hit, but it's at least kept me along for the ride. And then seeing some of the things after the fact, especially like when you pointed out how much of this is like true,
Yeah.
or how many real influence, not how much of this is true. I don't want people to
This
think
is
this happened.
this is based on a true story.
Do
You
you
can
know? Do you know
actually go meet Joe Erickson right now. Based on a true story, she'll tell you the whole experience that she went through.
the Cal is real?
Is it?
The cold atomic laboratory. Yeah, there's a lot of like it's interesting that it takes so many different things like real science, real conspiracy theories, like real cultural references, you know, and like weaves it all together into this kind of like interesting, compelling, sometimes creepy, sometimes confusing, sometimes, you know, whatever story. Like it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm digging it. I know that the I forget what the capsules are called. The Soyuz
Mm-hmm.
capsules. Those were actually
So you
real
said.
named rockets by the Russians
Right.
that they used.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of that real world part to it, but definitely agree. Like beginning of the show, very much like a mystery thriller or like a thriller. Is she gonna survive?
Right.
Then a mystery. What's going on? Who's who? What's what? Sciency stuff. Like yeah, it's been a roller
Yeah.
coaster of movements, and I'm digging it.
Digging it. Okay. Let's talk about people. And first, Henry and Bud, because I thought that was pretty interesting in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I just a lot of questions,
Okay.
with this. And so first,
Question one.
question one, and this is kind of outside of Henry and Bud, but we see Henry is first with Frederick and Magnus going to this cabin, right? He's
Yeah.
experienced this
Yep.
before. He's gonna help fix this problem. My first question is, Frederick was saying that we should not involve the police, otherwise they're gonna think Joe's crazy. And now we have the police. Why did he change his tune? That's the kind of a question one.
Maybe once it got to like child endangerment, it's kind of
But like
hard to
even
sweep that under the rug.
but when Magnus was first talking to Frederick, she had already kidnapped Alice, and he was like, you can't call
Right.
the police. They'll think she's crazy. And if you call one policeman, it'll get out that she's crazy and she'll never work again. And then it's like the
Right.
next scene, we're with
Yeah.
the police. Anyway, that one question, don't understand, but police are here.
Question B.
Question B. To me, it seems like the switch is not a physical switch, it is a conscious switch. Like you are switching your consciousness. Maybe. Because we did see in this episode that Bud and Henry are now switched. They like were able to cross, the different states. Henry is back in his plane of existence and Bud is back in his plane of existence. Did Joe's consciousness switch? Or is this Joe's body?
But Henry seemed like, I don't know if it's just consciousnesses or body switching, because wasn't Henry struggling to read the address without his glasses? When he's on the phone with 911, Paul is like shot on the floor. Wasn't Henry struggling to read the address without his, because Bud doesn't have glasses?
Well, I wonder if Bud just like doesn't wear his glasses all the time, because we didn't see Bud when he became Henry. He didn't like take off the glasses like, oh, my eyes, I can't see with these on, because like it's blurring my vision. He was continuing on, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, third question.
So,
Okay,
question I.
Question C, question 3, whichever you want to call it. But there is a moment where Bud drops Alice and he walks off.
Yeah.
He's just like, good luck, kid, and walks off. When the police show up, there's another body there. And it looks like Bud and Henry's body, and he's just laying there next to Alice. Like, right after he says, I was wearing shorts, I'm so cold, he, like, stumbles off, but it doesn't show him fall. And it's never addressed. But when Joe is working on Alice, and the other Alice sees her leave, the people are coming up, you can clearly see there's another body there that is wearing what Bud was wearing, or Henry was wearing. Yeah. And they even show that the ambulance people are working on Alice, and there are people that go to attend to this body, but it's never brought up.
I'm going to have to recheck that out, because I missed it.
I only noticed it my second watch through, because I was like wondering what happened, and then I saw that body and I was like, why, and maybe it was a mistake and they accidentally, like, they had a plan that Bud or whatever passed out there, and that they had to,
like, maybe there was a scene cut, or
yeah, so I'm not sure, but he's clearly there at the end of that episode.
Interesting. So seeing that they can switch for more than a moment made me kind of wonder if they have switched more than just that. Like the scene where we saw Bud throw the guy over the ship, but then, and I know that you said it's him doing a smart way of covering it up. You may be 100% right. I still think it seemed very genuine, his like not knowing that Ian was dead. And so I wonder if they switch there.
So that would be implying that Henry pushed Ian off the back, and the only problem with that is that Bud said right before he killed him that it was Henry that was screwing his life up. So Henry has not seemed to be an aggressive type. Like, I couldn't imagine Henry pushing off like showing up in a body and being like, "Oh, time to throw this guy off," you know?
Maybe there was like a moment where that switch happened. It wasn't like that entire scene was Henry.
Hmm.
Because there was also Bud also said something like Henry was an alcoholic, but we saw Bud at the beginning of that scene kind of drinking heavily at the bar, and then the next episode waking up on like lawn chair type furniture, not in his room, with like a handle of like some kind of liquor almost gone. But he tells Ian shortly before he throws him over that Henry was a drunk.
But we also haven't seen that. We haven't seen that in the Henry that we know. We haven't seen him be an alcoholic.
No, yeah.
So then it
Yeah.
would be like he would switch over to Bud, and then I don't know. I don't know if I
know.
fully subscribe to that. But
Then unclick the bell icon for notifications on that subscription.
on that subscription, I'm doing it,
Yeah.
and I don't know if they can fully do this switch often. I thought like the reason they were able to do this long-term switch was because they were like Henry was in this liminal space where a lot of craziness was happening, and that's why there was the big switch.
Okay, so I think I will get you to resubscribe to hear other theories. And here's the other one.
Okay.
So the episode where Henry has written about like Lithium-7.
Mm-hmm.
Above that, or below that, he wrote Death in Space. And maybe that's one of the things that has caused them to like switch. Because we saw that like Paul dies in one, Joe dies in another. And above Lithium-7, he writes stress trauma. So, like, was it the act of shooting Paul that's a potential death, or at least, like, on the verge, like, the liminal space between death and life, as a person is, like, bleeding out? Or is that, like, the stress trauma that, like, caused them to switch? And if that's the case, like, this, like, moments of, like, life and death and, like, stress trauma that also create these, like, places where the worlds can possibly, get closer, and you can possibly have people switch. I wonder if, and this would be terrible as a parent, or terrible as a human, not as a parent, terrible as a human, if Joe letting the Alice in front of her die would somehow cause somebody to switch so that she could be with her Alice in one of those two worlds.
Well, I would say that if so, like the
And maybe I've just got a tinfoil hat on. I'm getting crazy. I don't know.
No. I do like the stress trauma idea, and I think maybe that is why, I think with the liminal space and the stress trauma. So, like, I think space is considered a liminal space area.
Yep.
Like a very hardcore liminal space. The trauma of the ISS getting destroyed, both Paul and Joe, that's how they're able to switch, fairly easy. And I like it with Bud and Henry, where he's kind of in this weird spot with, and I think that the switch is also what made the shot happen. Not that the shot made the switch happen, but because they're like, I don't think Bud necessarily had an intention to shoot Paul, but was to like try to scare him out of there with the gun. And when they were switching, like Henry was walking into the cabin, he had his hand outstretched, they switched, and in that moment, his finger hit the trigger, and that's what killed him. I don't know, or shot him.
I can see that, and I can see one other thing.
Okay, what's the other thing?
Because I said that to Dawn, the same kind of idea of like his hand is outstretched and all of a sudden something is in his hand and he like squeezes it so he doesn't drop it, you
Yeah.
know, and so he pulls the trigger. But another thing is like Bud has told Henry that he's gonna mess up his life, and this guy comes to him. It's like a gift. This guy comes to him and is talking about like how much he respects Henry and how they work together. And it's like Henry was my mentor. And like the wheels are turning and Bud is like, "Man, I bet there's few people that Henry would really get upset about me killing like this guy."
Oh. See, I subscribe to that. Subscribe. I I
So,
I could see him wanting to kill him. Though it did seem that he wasn't
don't
really on.
don't unsubscribe. Don't do it.
I'm not. I'm
Don't.
not. I'm just
I
saying.
see your finger hovering.
No.
Move that mouse. Get,
Uh,
get, get.
all I'm saying is that when Paul Lancaster showed up, Bud was still a little apprehensive that he was sent by NASA, and even though he was
Yeah,
saying like I
yeah.
trained with you, he still seemed like not necessarily like, oh, you know Henry, you're from a different world, I'm gonna kill you. It's more like you're fucking with me,
Yeah.
and I'm not about this, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything.
We'll see. We'll see. Okay, so the last one I want to talk about, the Valya.
The Valya
That was good payoff.
with her in the hospital.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that to me, uh, Blue Alice had said that she was seeing this in her dreams, and who knows? Maybe it wasn't in her dreams. Maybe maybe it was just like really weird and at night, so she assumed it was that. Like maybe she'd talk to her dad about it, and her dad. We've seen like she doesn't have a great relationship with. Is this the one that doesn't? No, she'd actually cut that out. She does have a
Cut.
good relationship in this universe with her dad. Like maybe she talked to her dad about this, and her dad's like, "Oh, that's a nightmare." And so she believed her dad, and she's like, and so she's internalized that, and she's like, "I have these nightmares," versus like, "No, this is real. It happens." It's just interesting finally seeing that come to fruition from being told that this kid has nightmares of this to like seeing it, and I don't think this is a dream.
It did seem like a dream because she woke up in the hospital bed after experiencing that, but I also, knowing that we know the cosmonaut is real and knowing that the Valya is real, I don't think it
That
is a dream either. Like I think or maybe she's just accessing her through her dreams,
right?
cuz like maybe the dreamscape is a liminal space.
Liminal space, right?
It's a space that we travel in between our waking selves. And
Yeah.
that might be a way that she's able to talk to the Valya through dreams.
Interesting. Uh, I thought it was a great end to the episode. I thought it was a nice kind of like callback. It's been one of the things I've been wondering about is like one of the few questions we haven't had answers. I feel like the past few episodes have been giving us a lot of answers and like really illustrating confusing things clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything, but doing a pretty good job of like taking some very confusing things and like just making explicit. Here's what happened. But one of the few things that's been left hanging is like there's still an organization, right? Like what's up with these pills?
I do think the organization has been confirmed, because when Magnus is asking Henry, like, why are you here? And he's like, oh, I went through this before. And he's like, well, how'd you get out of it? Oh, I took my pills and I buried myself in the work. But what was telling was that he asked about Irina showing up. He's like, why is she coming? And he's like, because she knows how to fix this problem. Like, she seems at the top. And every time they, like, glanced at Frederick, and it looked like Frederick knew about it. Like, just kind of like, oh.
He's like, don't look at me. Don't look
yeah,
at me.
oh, this is awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. So that, like, that's one of the things that I feel like that's been left hanging, and that maybe most people are like happy with the answers they've been giving, and I've been still waiting for that. And then the other part is like, it was so convenient for the cosmonaut to that should have disintegrated in space or something. I don't know. Like, to hit the space station at that time when the experiment for the cowl was going. Like, that just seems too convenient.
Yeah.
And to find out that, Irina's name is, that at least at one point she's referenced as Irina, and one point references Valya. To me, I wonder if she is able to control that, and if she has a much bigger part in what's going on.
Well, it is interesting to see that, if she's controlling it or not, because I know you did talk about her maybe slamming, controlling the corpse in space and having it hit the ISS. But even if she isn't controlling it, it does seem that the dead cosmonaut has a bit of a consciousness and is is trying to get something. I don't know what her end goal is, what is her plan, but she does seem like she is the dead cosmonaut is communicating with Alice, which also begs the question, if this dead cosmonaut can talk to Alice, can the dead Joe or the dead Paul talk to any of their family members?
Right. I mean, I think the dead Joe that's left in space was potentially like the one that unlocked the door from the other side,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what happened there.
But which might get back to what I mentioned about time, potentially, because it definitely didn't seem like the Joe in the moment knew what was going on and was doing anything to control that Joe.
But there could be a point where our Joe in this next episode goes back and becomes dead Joe to unlock.
That's kind of what I'm wondering, is like whether or not there's, because I do feel like we've hinted at like playing with time, and this definitely hasn't felt like this definitely doesn't feel like your typical time thing where it's like people are going in the past and crazy things are happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it does feel like there's maybe like connections, maybe.
Yes, definitely.
And they've like set some breadcrumbs that will allow us, because if they hadn't left any breadcrumbs, that would be very unsatisfying.
Yeah.
But like the fact that we've seen like time speed up, slow down, and stop kind of makes me feel like maybe.
I could see it. I could definitely see it. Timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly nonsense. Pfft.
Yeah.
They just copied Doctor Who.
They did.
I feel like this episode, there wasn't a lot to it. Like, there were You know, we saw a lot of these things already. Like, we saw her give Alice the bath, and, like,
Yeah, yep.
the scene of the Alice's talking was very, like, drawn out. Like, there was a lot of parts of, like, both Alice leaving the cabin, Joe leaving the cabin, walking across the cabin, Magnus wanting to find them. And so it did seem like it was gonna, like, there wasn't a lot of, like, meat to the episode of, like, new information.
And for what you described, like with this episode having a, a lot of new perspective on old material, and sometimes that new perspective happens like twice, because we'll like see, you know, Red Alice and Blue Alice's side of it,
Yeah.
or like Joe's side and Magnus's side of it. So it's like we've already seen parts of this, and now we're going to see it like two more times. But at the same time, it didn't necessarily feel. It didn't feel like it was just filler.
Mm-hmm.
It did feel like there was like good information. It ended on some solid points of Bud crossing, seeing the Valya, having a number of like very confusing things kind of explained.
Closure of both Alice's understanding that there are two different states, like there, like even that there's two different Alices.
Right. And the potential closure of people maybe having to accept their realities even if it's not the ones, and that's like an assumption of what might happen. That like the Alice who's Joe's alive might have to accept the fact that she doesn't get her mom back. Which, like, if you're to spread out happiness, I guess that could be like spreading out happiness and sadness the best way, of like Red Alice gets to know that her mom is still alive, which is good. She just won't really get to see her again. And then like Blue Alice, her mom is dead, but she does get another mom, like it's like.
And she did that. The Blue Alice did have to come to the terms of that her mom was the mom that died.
Why, once again, like Alice is really smart.
Alice is really smart.
Yeah.
How did she know she was going to be able to talk to her through the recording thing?
Yeah.
Like that, and that was just like a shot at the dark. She was just like, I'm kind of in this weird version of my cabin.
I don't think it was a complete shot in the dark. Like I think because she'd been listening to the tapes, it's like it seems like these are able to record this stuff.
Right.
I think because tapes are in this like liminal space between like records and CDs.
Oh.
Ooh.
Oh.
I might have just pulled that one out of my butt.
I could tell. Yeah, I mean, now I'm gonna poo-poo on a little thing real quick, is that
Speaking of butts,
technically the Magnus and Alice, so Red Alice, didn't bring the tape recorder with her. Like,
I don't get that at all, because like both kids have it, but then Joe finds it without the kids.
And Magnus finds it without the kids too.
Magnus finds it without the kids.
So there were four, in my mind, there's four different cabins, right? There's cabin with angel painting, cabin with devil painting, and that's like the differences.
Yep.
Then there's like the liminal cabin for both of them, which has the characters of the painting swapped. And so there's like four of these recorders that Joe heard, Magnus heard, and both Alice's heard.
Yeah.
So I understand why Joe and Alice brought the recorder, because they had tapes to listen to. But why did Magnus and Red Alice bring the recorder to the cabin? That's my one little poo-poo.
It's a fair nitpick, and I had similar questions, especially with like Joe and Magnus taking the recorders, and yeah, I don't get that. I think that's like, I think we're getting into like wibbly wobbly timey wimey territory, or maybe it's explained, or the other. If we go back to like my wild theory of like a lot more universes, that could easily be explained, because we could watch a universe where the like I was wondering if there were moments when we were watching this where I don't feel like the kids were constantly hitting the button, and it seemed like the machine was just running.
I
And so I did wonder if there's like one a world where a girl is like recording things, and another world where a girl is like listening to things, and they line up kind of like Blink, where it's like in the right circumstance all of this stuff will line up. But like I do wonder if there's like in enough universes, like, can you have this stuff line up?
I think that was a stylistic choice by the director to be like, we know that they're pushing it because we already saw them do it multiple times. Now we're just communicating to each other, and instead of being like, oh, we're recording, play, record, play, record, play. It's more of like we can have just a conversation. That's how I thought it was like a style choice.
That's what I was kind of thinking. It definitely makes it more like allows like the emotional gravitas of the scene to go through, but it also takes away from like the super science-y and like really paying like this is a show about details and like close attention, and so things like that I think confuse. If you're a show that is trying to like pay attention to details, to do something like that and like gloss over something, I don't think is necessarily great. I know this is going to be a bit of a leap, but just follow me on this. The John Wick movies.
Okay.
Take their gun fu very seriously. Down to the point of like, they know how many bullets are shot every single time. Reloading is taken very seriously in those movies. Like there are some movies that don't pay attention to these kind of details, and it's like they just like create a silly world and don't like really think about the rules of it. And the John Wick movies, they realize like their world is built around these guns, and they are going to take that so seriously. And to me, to like gloss over something so fundamental to a show like this, if that's just, I don't know if I love that being like a stylistic choice in this case. Because that, to me, that's just a little confusing, and I did have those same kind of, I was like, are they not touching the buttons? Are they just like choosing not to show those parts to like get a little bit more into like the emotion? I don't know. I'm slightly confused, and it was good enough it didn't like completely take me out, but at the same time I was kind of like, what?
Yeah. I mean, that's fair, but we'll never know. Or maybe we'll find out in the next episode. We'll see.
That's a very real possibility.
We'll see.
But one episode is, I don't think, going to answer all the questions, which does make me wonder, is there going to be a season 2? Who knows?
or just leave it open-ended. Just
Or just leave it open-ended.
use your imagination. Because, like, you know, I don't think we're going to go back and talk about why they experienced the thing in the helicopter. Like, oh, it was the liminal space. You know, like, I think there are things that you just kind of have to, like, the show does a little bit of hand-holding to, like, explain concepts and things, but then it's like, we're not going to go back and explain everything. Like, we might not even get a explanation of how the capsules got unlocked. We might not even get that. And it'd just be like, you have to infer why it happened. But
although I do feel like that one is a little bit different, because I do think that I think that one's a little bit different. I think we will get that one, because I think that is like that potential like time aspect, but we'll see.
I do hope
but
so, because
I do agree that they won't answer every question. Like they're like, look, we gave you the rules. We pieced a bunch of it together for you so you can see how those rules interact. You are going to have to do some of this work yourself.
Yeah. But with that, I believe our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining us for Constellation Episode 7. Next week, come back and join us for the final episode of Constellation as we try to figure out and piece together what has happened to Joe and Paul and all of them. This is Road Goes Ever On. I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.